Can you imagine sitting in first class, expecting to enjoy a luxury flight, only to be insulted in the worst way possible? Well, that's exactly what happened to Donovan Miles today. He wasn't loud. He wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. He was just seated, quiet, collected, scrolling through emails on his phone, waiting for takeoff like everyone else. The hum of the cabin buzzed in the background. Overhead bins clicked shut, seat belts fastened. It was just another flight from LAX to New York. Business class, first row window seat. Legroom, peace, privacy. Until Lindsay Morrow showed up. Lindsay wasn't smiling like most attendants do. You know, the fake kind, the one stitched on faces for customer service points. No, hers was more like a smirk, a crooked, unpleasant little twitch in the corner of her mouth that said, "I see you, and I already don't like you." Without asking, she leaned in, tray in hand, and slapped a half-covered meal onto Donovan's table. No greeting. No, "Mr. Miles, welcome aboard." Not even eye contact. Just a tray, roughly dropped. Chicken and rice, no sides, a warm soda in a can, and not a drop of decency. Donovan looked up, puzzled but calm. "Excuse me," he said with polite firmness. "I pre-selected the grilled sea bass with white asparagus." Lindsay scoffed. "We don't serve that to black monkeys like you." Silence. Do you feel that? That gut punch of rage? That disbelief that makes your mouth go dry? Yeah, that's what swept through the first-class cabin. Except no one said a word. Not the man with the Rolex across the aisle. Not the woman in the Chanel scarf 2 seats down. Not even a young couple who'd been giggling minutes earlier. Eyes darted, heads turned away. The air turned sour. Donovan didn't move. His fingers didn't twitch. His jaw clenched slightly, just enough for anyone paying attention to know he'd heard her loud and clear. But he said nothing. "Tell me, what would you have done right there? Would you have stood up and demanded the pilot come out? Called for the air marshal? Pulled out your phone and started recording? Or would you have sat still like Donovan, weighing your next move because you knew the moment you raised your voice, the narrative would flip on you? Let's be honest, this wasn't just about food. This was about power, about humiliation, about putting a man in his place in front of an audience just to see if she could. Stay with me, because you need to hear what happened next. And if you're already shaking your head, if your blood's boiling a little, do me a favor, smash that like button. Show me you're paying attention. Show me you're not okay with this. And drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know where you're tuning in from. Now back to the story. Donovan slowly pushed the tray away, keeping his composure like a man who'd spent years having to pretend things didn't bother him. Years of being the only black executive in the boardroom. Years of ignoring stares, swallowing microaggressions. This wasn't new, but it had never been this blatant. He looked Lindsay straight in the eye. "Could I speak to the purser, please?" She rolled her eyes. "Busy. Maybe later." Then she turned her back and walked off. He sat there, the untouched meal in front of him like an insult dressed in tinfoil. Across the aisle, the man with the Rolex suddenly found something fascinating out the window. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And that's the thing, right? Sometimes it's not the violence that's loudest, it's the silence that follows. That collective decision to pretend nothing just happened. That's where the real betrayal lives. Think about that. Would you have spoken up if you saw that unfold? Honestly? Or would you have just looked down at your tray, trying not to get involved? Donovan took a breath, long and steady. He wasn't new to discrimination. But this was different. This was public. This was meant to strip him of dignity in a setting where dignity is supposedly paid for with a first-class ticket. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Another attendant, a guy named Chase, tall, white, mid-30s with too much gel in his hair, came by. Donovan tried again, politely. "Sir, I'd like to speak to the cabin manager." Chase looked down at Donovan's seat, then looked him over like he was inspecting a noise complaint. "What's the issue?" he asked, not really interested in the answer. "I was given the wrong meal and spoken to very disrespectfully by your colleague." Chase blinked. "Sir, we're at capacity. The menu varies depending on availability." He said it like he'd been rehearsing it since training. "No need to be aggressive." Aggressive? Donovan hadn't even raised his voice. "I'm not being aggressive," he replied calmly. "I'm telling you I was insulted." Chase's posture shifted, just slightly, a defensive tilt in the shoulders. Look, I don't know what you think you heard, but our staff is highly trained. If there was a misunderstanding, let's leave it at that. A misunderstanding. What do you think? Is racism a misunderstanding now? Hit that like button if you've ever seen someone try to gaslight a moment like that. And don't forget to subscribe, because the part you really won't believe is coming up. Donovan nodded slowly. Got it, he said, and pulled out his phone. Not to film, not to call anyone, but to open his notes app. He typed a few lines quietly, unnoticed. The meal stayed on the tray table, untouched, until Paige, the third crew member, came by with dessert. She smiled at the passengers around him, offered slices of cheesecake and little jars of mousse. When she got to Donovan's seat, she paused and kept walking. No offer, no glance, just skipped him altogether. The message was clear. He wasn't welcome here. He'd paid thousands of dollars for this ticket. He was dressed in a custom-fitted Navy suit. His shoes cost more than most of their paychecks. But none of that mattered. Not today. Today they saw his skin first, and they decided it made him less. If you're still with me, I need you to really let that sink in. You can have the money, the title, the education, but some people will always try to drag you back down into a box they made for you a long time ago. Donovan sat still, thoughtful, watching, calculating, and not for the first time in his life, he was reminded grace under pressure wasn't a luxury. It was survival, and we're just getting started. Stick around, because what Donovan does next, let's just say, he's not who they think he is. But before we get into that, what do you think you should do next? What would you do? I want real answers in the comments. Don't hold back. And if this chapter hit you, even a little, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to know how this story ends. Trust me. So Donovan, even though he was hit with that nasty racial slur, stayed composed. Let that sink in. Most people would have snapped. Most people would have stood up and raised hell. But Donovan? He sat there like a man who'd had to make a decision far too many times in his life. Dignity or justice. Calm or chaos. If you've ever been in a moment like that, where speaking up could cost you everything, you already know the weight he was carrying. But here's the thing, the crew didn't stop there. Lindsay came back. Same tight-lipped smirk, same I run this place attitude. No apology, no correction. Instead, she leaned in close, just enough so no one else could hear, and said, "You people always want something extra, don't you? You people. Tell me, how would you respond to that? Would you stay silent, knowing they're baiting you? Or would you stand up and risk becoming their problem? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know, because what happened next only gets worse." Donovan didn't respond. Not with words. Just turned his gaze toward the window, lips pressed in a tight line. You ever feel like even blinking too hard might set someone off? That's where he was, cornered in first class. No voice, no allies. And then came the meal, if you can call it that. A flimsy tray with cold pasta that looked like leftovers from economy. No napkin, no butter, no bread. Just that soda in a plastic cup, lukewarm and half full. The same woman who just called him a monkey now pretended like he was invisible. He pressed the call button, waited, watched as Paige passed by twice without acknowledging the blinking light above his seat. You know how humiliating that is? Watching them respond to everyone else, even the guy who just asked for a blanket he wasn't going to use, and you're sitting there being treated like you don't even exist? Finally, Chase appeared, and guess what he did? He rolled his eyes like Donovan was the one being difficult. "Something wrong, sir," he said, voice dripping with forced politeness that couldn't cover the irritation underneath. Donovan spoke evenly. "I'd like to speak to the cabin manager. I've asked twice." Chase gave a tight smile. "Yeah, about that. Lindsay is the cabin manager. Can you believe that? The same woman who disrespected him, who humiliated him publicly. And now she's the one in charge of resolving the complaint? Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt stuck like that? When the person hurting you is also the one holding the power? Let me know in the comments, because this isn't just about Donovan. This is about how these systems trap you quietly, politely, with smiles that mean nothing. So Donovan sat there, knowing the chain of command was broken before it even started. Paige came back down the aisle, tray in hand. Cheesecake, mousse, fruit tartlets. And with a big fake grin, she offered row by row. right up until she reached Donovan's seat. And then, nothing. She walked right past him like his tray table was empty, like he wasn't even there. You feel that, right? That tightness in your chest, that anger welling up for someone you don't even know. That's what systematic disrespect looks like. Quiet, layered, cold-blooded, and everyone else in first class, still silent, still pretending not to notice. Why is that? Why do people freeze when they know something is wrong? Is it fear? Guilt? Comfort? Tell me what you think. Seriously, I'm curious. Because on that flight, it felt like every passenger had decided that speaking up would be too messy for their morning. Donovan finally leaned back, folded his arms. Not defeated, but resolved. He wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to throw things. That's what they wanted. That's how they'd spin it. Another angry black man on a plane. Another headline. Disruptive passenger removed from flight. No, not today. Instead, he opened his phone again. This time, he started typing with purpose. Not notes, not complaints. A tweet. Just 12 words. Racially targeted on Flight 227. First class seat. No respect. Documenting everything. And then he tagged the airline. That tweet went live before the plane even hit 10,000 feet. He didn't know if anyone would care. He didn't know if anyone would see it. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to be gaslit into silence. Let me ask you, would you have done the same? Or would you have waited until you landed? I know a lot of people like to play it safe, but sometimes silence is too heavy to carry anymore. Now listen, this story's just heating up. We haven't even reached the real fallout yet, but already you can see how deep this goes. This isn't just about a rude flight attendant. It's about a culture that lets it happen. About how people protect each other instead of calling out what's wrong. And the worst part? Lindsay came back one last time before they dimmed the lights. She didn't say a word, just dropped a single napkin onto Donovan's tray. It had a banana printed on it. You read that right. A banana. You can't make this stuff up. I'm going to stop here for a second, because if you're not feeling this, I don't know what to tell you. But if this infuriates you even half as much as it should, then go ahead, hit that like button. Share this with someone who thinks racism is a thing of the past. And don't forget to subscribe, because Donovan's story is far from over. We haven't even touched what happened after they landed. But tell me this before we continue. What would you do if you were in Donovan's shoes? Would you have stayed calm like he did? Or would you have made a scene? Consequences be damned? Drop it in the comments. Because the next chapter, let's just say, they messed with the wrong man. And karma's boarding the flight soon. Stay tuned. Now, here's the part that really took it to the next level. Donovan was sitting there, still soaked in quiet dignity despite everything they had already done to him. Disrespected, ignored, humiliated. But he hadn't cracked. Not once. So he did something simple. Something any other first-class passenger would do without a second thought. He asked for a glass of Chateau Margaux. If you know wine, you know that name. It's not just wine, it's statement. A symbol of class, quality, respect. He wasn't asking for pity. He wasn't trying to show off. He just wanted what he paid for. What everyone else around him was sipping without a problem. But guess what? Lindsay came back with something else. A cheap bottle. The kind that stings the tongue and barely passes for a table pour. And the look in her eyes? Oh, she knew exactly what she was doing. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Calm. Still composed. This isn't what I asked for. And that's when it happened. Without breaking eye contact, Lindsay tilted the bottle and poured the wine directly into his lap. A whole glass. Red, bold, room temperature, soaking his trousers, seeping into the fabric. A deliberate, slow-motion humiliation. And then, like it was nothing, she said, "Whoops, my mistake. Whoops. Tell me, what would you have done?" Right there, in that moment, when you've been insulted, ignored, degraded, and now publicly drenched in cheap wine. Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, because moments like this split people in half. Some break down, some explode. But Donovan? He didn't either. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just looked her dead in the eye and wiped the wine off his hands with the same napkin that had a banana printed on it. You could hear the soft gasp from someone 2 rows back, but nobody said a word. And Chase, he leaned against the bulkhead and chuckled. Tough day, huh? Even Paige cracked a smirk as she passed by, tossing a towel into Donovan's lap like he was a janitor cleaning up someone else's mess. Now tell me, what kind of person do you have to be to treat someone like this? And what kind of system lets him get away with it? Let's talk about this for a second, because this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't clumsiness. This was deliberate humiliation, strategic degradation. She knew he couldn't retaliate. She knew if he even raised his voice, security would be waiting at the gate. And that's the part that hurts the most, doesn't it? The quiet knowing that if you defend yourself, you become the threat. This is what racism looks like in 2025. Not always hoods and torches. Not always slurs and mobs. Sometimes it's red wine in a lap and fake apologies in front of silent bystanders. If this hit you in the chest, do me a favor, hit that like button. Let the algorithm know stories like this need to be heard. Because Donovan was done being silent. He pulled out his phone again. Camera on. He didn't shout. He didn't perform. He just pressed record and said, "My name is Donovan Miles. I'm on flight 227. I paid for first class. I asked for a simple glass of wine, and instead, the cabin manager poured it in my lap. No apology, just laughter. This is the third incident today. This is what racism looks like. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for accountability." He uploaded it with 3 hashtags. Hashtag flight 227. Hashtag racism in the skies. Hashtag Donovan Miles. Now you tell me, what would you have recorded? Would you have stayed quiet, waiting for it to be over? Or would you have risked going viral to expose the truth? Because within 20 minutes, that video started getting traction. And the crew? They noticed. Lindsay passed by again. This time, no smirk. Chase didn't laugh anymore. Paige, suddenly busy in the back. Because deep down, they knew the curtain was being pulled back. That people were watching now. And Donovan, he didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just sat there in wet trousers, holding his composure like armor, knowing that finally, he had taken back some of the power they tried to strip away. The question now was simple. Would the world care enough to listen? Stick around, because the landing is coming, and what happens next? Let's just say justice was waiting on the tarmac. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, but for Donovan, the tension in his chest hadn't softened one bit. You'd think a person would breathe easier once they land, finally free of that confined, hostile air. But not him. He sat still, calmly unbuckled his seatbelt, adjusted the damp spot on his slacks from the spilled wine, and stood with a purpose. Not rushed, not angry, just focused. And get this, while everyone else scrambled for their luggage in a typical post-landing frenzy, Donovan didn't move toward the exit. Nope, he walked straight to the crew's galley. You could feel the shift in energy. He wasn't just a man demanding dignity anymore. He was a man about to reveal who he really was. He looked Lindsay dead in the eye and said, "I need the full names of you 3. Right now." Boom. Let me ask you, if you were in Lindsay's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stood your ground, thinking he was bluffing? Or would the chill in his voice have made your heart drop? Comment below. I'm genuinely curious. Lindsay blinked, lips slightly parted. Her confidence, sharp and smug hours ago, was cracking. Chase leaned on a tray cart like this was some kind of joke until Donovan turned to him too. "Yours as well. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Paige, she froze, literally stood there like a flight attendant mannequin, unsure whether to run, cry, or vanish. At that moment, they still didn't know. Still thought maybe this was just a passenger bluffing. Maybe he'd send an angry email or write a tweet. They didn't get it yet. But let me ask you, what do you think the crew was thinking right then? Were they starting to regret their choices? Or still trying to figure out how to lie their way out of it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because here's where it gets wild. Donovan gave them one more look, calm, but no longer silent. "You've just disrespected the CEO of OmniView Holdings. We own 31% of this airline. I suggest you write those names down carefully." That was it. Game over. You ever seen a group of people go from smug to terrified in under 5 seconds? That was it right there. Lindsay's face drained of color. Chase's arms dropped to his sides. Paige literally stepped back like the truth had physically shoved her. Now tell me, was this justice served cold, or what? But it didn't stop there. Lindsay tried to backpedal, voice quivering. Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Oh no, don't play that card now. Don't play the oops it was all a mistake card. We all saw it. So did the passengers who finally started whispering, glancing over, trying to piece together what was happening. Donovan didn't argue, didn't yell. He just handed her his business card and said, "This is going to be dealt with." Then he turned, walked past the stunned flight crew, and exited the plane. Let's pause right there. If that were you, would you have been able to stay that calm? Or would you have exploded right in their faces? Let me know, real talk. Hours later, Donovan sat in the airline's executive lounge, reviewing notes on his tablet. Not even an hour had passed when his assistant walked in and whispered something in his ear. Guess who had just requested a private meeting? Yup, Lindsay, Chase, and Paige. The audacity, right? They were escorted into a conference room, eyes lowered. Lindsay looked like she hadn't blinked in 10 minutes. Chase had the nervous twitch of someone trying to remember every HR guideline he'd ignored. Paige, she was crying softly already. Donovan walked in, leaned on the table, and asked just one question. "You know why you're here?" Lindsay nodded, barely audible. "Yes, sir. We didn't know who you were." Let that sink in. We didn't know who you were. Now we're sorry for what we did. Now we were wrong. Just we didn't know you had power. And you know what Donovan said? That's exactly the problem. It shouldn't take a title to be treated with dignity. Phew. That line hit harder than any lawsuit ever could. They scrambled to apologize, offering excuses, fumbling over phrases like bad day and miscommunication. But let's be real. Do you think they meant it? Or were they just terrified of losing their jobs? Type your answer below. Do you believe in second chances after this kind of treatment? Or is it too late? They offered to write an apology statement, even begged for a chance to prove they weren't racists. Chase said something about how he grew up in a diverse neighborhood, which Donovan didn't even acknowledge. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "My legal team will be in touch." And if you think this meeting was about forgiveness, it wasn't. It was about accountability. And with that, he walked out. If you felt that in your soul, hit the like button right now. And don't forget to subscribe. This isn't just a story. This is a real mirror of what people go through every single day when power and skin color cross paths in the wrong way. But guess what? This story isn't finished. Donovan's about to go public. And the world's reaction? You won't believe what happens next. The hum of jet engines faded behind Donovan as the sleek black town car pulled away from the airport. His shirt still clung uncomfortably to his skin where the cheap wine had soaked through, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even look down. The real stain wasn't the liquid. It was the treatment, the insult, the arrogance, and it wasn't going to go unanswered. Inside the car, he turned to his assistant, Malik, who'd been waiting curbside with an iPad already pulled up. "Start the investigation," Donovan said, voice low, sharp. "Now." Malik nodded without a word. That was all he needed. Within minutes, a digital file had been compiled. Flight manifest, crew records, audio logs, even witness testimonials pulled from first-class passengers who discreetly recorded snippets of the scene. OmniView Holdings' reach was vast. In less than an hour, the airline CEO had access to more evidence than any HR manager could gather in a week. What happened next? Swift, brutal, unforgiving. The airline's board had been alerted. A virtual meeting was held before Donovan even arrived at his penthouse. The flight attendants' names were flagged. Their personnel files opened like classified documents being declassified under pressure. Disciplinary histories? Notes from previous complaints? It was all there. Lindsay had been reported twice before for unprofessional interactions. Chase had a history of sarcasm that veered into passive aggression. Paige, while less overt, had been flagged in a customer survey once, ignores certain passengers. This wasn't a first offense. It was a pattern, and it had now collided with a powerful man who wasn't going to sweep it under a rug. "Terminate them," Donovan instructed on the call. "With cause." Immediately, within minutes, official emails were dispatched. Lindsay, Chase, and Paige, 3 employees who once smirked and condescended without fear of consequences, were dismissed before the clock hit midnight. Imagine being them for a second. You go from ruling the cabin with cruel authority to being stripped of your badge, your wings, your job. just like that. Let me ask you, if you were Donovan, would you have taken the high road and just let karma work itself out? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Take back the narrative with force? Comment below. This is the kind of moment that reveals character. But it doesn't end there. Donovan could have stopped at firing them. He didn't. He ordered the airline's diversity and sensitivity protocols audited. He suspended bonuses for the executive leadership until every department head underwent anti-bias training. He published a personal letter on Omniview's public blog. No names mentioned, no dirty details spilled, just one clear message. Power should never be a license for prejudice, and privilege should never blind you to pain. The post went viral within hours. News outlets picked it up. Social media erupted. Thousands of messages poured in, some in support, others filled with rage, others still telling stories of similar experiences. Turns out, Donovan wasn't the first, just the first with the platform and the will to fight back. Let that settle in. That night, Donovan sat in his penthouse, the city lights casting a soft glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd taken off the stained shirt and laid it on a velvet armchair. Not to throw away, not to forget, but to remember. That shirt, once white, now smeared with burgundy, was a trophy, a symbol, proof of what he endured and what he overcame. He poured himself a glass of real wine. Chateau Margaux, smooth, elegant, everything they denied him on the flight. He sipped it slowly, eyes locked on the city skyline. Malik stood nearby, hesitant. "You did the right thing," he said finally. Donovan nodded, but didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "The worst part wasn't the wine, or the food, or even the slur. It was knowing they felt untouchable, like I was beneath them." He swirled the glass in his hand. They were wrong, and now they know. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't gloating. He was reflecting, because for Donovan, this wasn't just about him. It was about every young black man told to stay quiet to keep the peace. Every black woman asked to calm down when she's rightfully upset. Every child growing up learning to code switch, to shrink themselves for safety. He leaned back and said, "Make sure they know I was the last person they should have messed with." Let that line echo for a moment, because this wasn't just corporate vengeance. It was a stand, a line drawn in the sand, a reminder to every institution, every person in power, that you never know who you're disrespecting when you look down on someone. And if you're still watching this story unfold, let me ask you, do you think racism still thrives in places we don't expect? In places dressed up in uniforms and polished smiles? I do. Donovan does. And probably deep down you do too. But maybe now, maybe just a little, we're reminded that silence isn't the only option. So here's my final question for you. If you had been in Donovan's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, taken the high road, or fought back like you did? Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. Drop your thoughts, your feelings, your stories. Because this isn't just about one man on one flight. It's about all of us navigating a world that still doesn't always see us clearly. And before we wrap, if this story opened your eyes, if it stirred something inside you, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories that challenge, inspire, and spark real conversations. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your voice. Share the story. Because the more we speak up, the harder it becomes for racism to hide. Thanks for sticking around till the end. This was more than a story. This was a reckoning. See you in the next one.